Is it possible that money born from the sweat, dedication, and tears of a global idol could instead quietly flow to cover someone else's debt? And if that is true, who has actually been paying the price for the glory of a giant entertainment empire all this time? This question sounds too extreme to be real, yet that is precisely why it is now echoing loudly in the public sphere as the names Jungkook, BTS, HYBE, and Scooter Braun are dragged into a single narrative that is shocking, full of mystery, emotional, and laden with unanswered suspicions. For years, the South Korean entertainment industry has been admired as a model of global success that is structured, disciplined, and almost sterile from major financial scandals. HYBE Corporation has stood as a symbol of that transformation, a company that began with a single group called BTS, and then evolved into a multinational entertainment conglomerate. However, at the beginning of 2026, that solid image was suddenly shaken by a rumor that sounded like a dark whisper from behind the glass walls of a corporate building. Is it true that BTS's profits, which include the individual contribution of Jungkook as one of the main engines of global popularity, were used to cover the massive debt left by Scooter Braun through the acquisition of Ithaca Holdings? This issue did not emerge from a vacuum. Investigative reports first highlighted by New Tamsa, then quoted and expanded by various international entertainment media such as HYBE, ignited heated discussions that quickly turned into collective anger. The figures mentioned were not small numbers that could be dismissed as ordinary accounting errors. Around 120 billion Korean wons, equivalent to more than $80 million, was said to have flowed from BTS's income to pay off debt attached to Ithaca Holdings, the company owned by Scooter Braun that was acquired by HYBE in April 2021. In an instant, the public's question shifted from "Is this true?" to "If this is true, how could this happen without anyone speaking out?" BTS is not merely an artist under HYBE, they are the economic foundation of the company, the pulse that has driven the financial engine of that giant since the beginning. For years, HYBE's financial reports have consistently shown one fact that is difficult to dispute academically. The majority of the company's revenue comes from BTS's activities, whether through music, tours, merchandise, or global content expansion. Jungkook, as a member with extraordinary individual appeal, is often cited by industry analysts as one of the high-value assets that contribute significantly to the company's cash flow. Therefore, when allegations emerged that money generated by BTS was used to patch the debt from a high-risk acquisition, public shock became unavoidable. The acquisition of Ithaca Holdings itself was not a business decision free from controversy from the start. With the deal value reported to be close to 1 trillion Korean wons, even swelling to around 1.2 trillion Korean wons when all costs were calculated, HYBE's move at the time was praised as an aggressive strategy to penetrate the United States market. However, behind the ambitious narrative of global expansion lay a complex financing structure. Around 74% of the company's cash reserves were used for the transaction, while the remainder was covered through additional loans amounting to 560 billion Korean wons. In the context of corporate finance, decisions like this always carry risk, especially when the company's main source of revenue is still heavily concentrated on a single artist group. Scooter Braun is not an unfamiliar figure in the global entertainment world. His name is associated with the success of many Western artists, but it is also inseparable from major controversies, including his dispute with Taylor Swift over master recording rights. In that case, Braun reportedly sold the master rights and retained most of the profits, while the remaining debt burden stayed attached to the company's structure. When HYBE took over Ithaca Holdings, that debt automatically became part of the corporation's responsibility. This is where critical questions began to arise. Where did the funds come from to cover that burden? And to what extent were the artists under HYBE aware of or agreed to the use of their income? When New Tamsa attempted to confirm these allegations directly with Bang Si-hyuk, the chairman of HYBE, who is also known as the architect behind BTS's success, the response received only added another layer of mystery. The messages sent were reportedly read but received no official reply. In crisis communication, silence often speaks louder than clarification. For the public, especially fans, the silence of the company's top leadership only strengthened suspicions that there was something deliberately being kept hidden. Fan reactions exploded uncontrollably. On Platform X, A post from the account at EmpireX stating that HYBE was accused of using $83 million of BTS's money to pay Scooter Braun's debt garnered millions of views in a short time. Discussions that initially carried a speculative tone turned into expressions of disappointment, anger, and even betrayal. On Korean forums such as The Coup, sharp comments emerged questioning where the money generated by BTS had actually gone all this time. Some suggested the possibility of dark funds, while others openly accused management of abusing the trust of the artists and fans. To this point, the narrative was no longer merely about numbers and financial reports. This issue touched a far deeper emotional realm. BTS, including Jungkook, have for years built an almost sacred relationship with ARMY, a relationship based on trust, hard work, and mutual protection. The allegation that the fruits of their labor may have been used without transparency to resolve another party's business problems felt like the first crack in that foundation of trust. Moreover, this rumor emerged ahead of BTS's planned return in 2026 after mandatory military service, a moment that should have been celebrated as the beginning of a new chapter, not overshadowed by a financial scandal. Academically, this case opens a broader discussion about corporate governance in the South Korean entertainment industry. In many artist contracts, companies have broad discretion in managing revenue before distributing it to artists according to agreements. However, when a company grows into a global conglomerate with cross-border investments, the line between operational fund usage and potential misuse becomes increasingly blurred. Whether such actions are legally permissible and whether they are ethically justifiable are two different questions that have now merged into a single storm of public opinion. To date, HYBE has not issued an official statement explicitly denying or confirming the allegations. This absence of clarification is what allows the rumor to continue living, growing, and even forming its own narrative in the public's mind. In the modern media world, especially when a global fandom is involved, truth often lags behind perception. And the perception currently forming is one of injustice, of artists who are the backbone of a company yet are allegedly unable to control where the results of their labor are channeled. If money truly never lies, why do its traces in this case feel so vague, layered, and seemingly deliberately obscured? And why does Jungkook's name appear most frequently in public discourse when these accusations point toward the very heart of HYBE's financial power? This question becomes increasingly relevant as the discussion shifts from mere emotional rumor to a colder, more analytical, and almost academic reading of how the financial structure of a giant entertainment company operates, and who actually bears the greatest burden of every global expansion decision. In corporate financial reports, money is never labeled with the name of a specific artist. It moves as cash flow, net profit, reserves, and investments. Yet the public understands a simple reality that is difficult to refute with any accounting jargon. Without BTS, and without Jungkook as one of the strongest magnets of global popularity, HYBE would not be in the financial position that allowed it to acquire Ithaca Holdings at a value of nearly 1.2 trillion Korean wons. This is where emotional narrative meets financial logic. When a company uses cash reserves to pay debt or obligations, the public instinctively asks, where did those reserves come from? Since BTS's debut, HYBE's annual reports have repeatedly emphasized that the largest portion of the company's revenue comes from the group's activities. In several years prior to mandatory military service, BTS's contribution to HYBE's total revenue was estimated to exceed half of the company's overall income. Jungkook, with solo sales, brand appeal, and dominance in global streaming, is often cited by analysts as one of the largest individual contributors. Thus, when allegations emerged that 120 billion Korean wons was used to settle debt related to Scooter Braun, the public quickly drew a straight line between the source of the money and its use, even though technically the company could argue that the funds belonged to the corporation, not the artists. However, the issue does not stop at legality alone. There is an ethical dimension that is far more difficult to dismiss. Many fans question whether BTS, including Jungkook, were ever informed that the profits generated from their work could potentially be used to resolve financial problems they did not create. In the Korean entertainment industry, the relationship between artists and agencies is often unequal. Companies hold control over contracts, revenue distribution, and investment decisions. When global expansion is carried out in the name of long-term growth, artists often have little room to approve or reject that direction, even though they are the primary source of the funds. The name Scooter Braun adds another layer of controversy that makes public emotion even harder to contain. Braun is not merely a business figure. He is a symbol of copyright conflict, Western industry power, and old wounds that still linger among global music fans due to the Taylor Swift case. When rumors suggest that debt from transactions involving Swift's master rights was instead covered by money generated by BTS, ARMY's anger found a new focal point. For many fans, this is no longer about financial mismanagement, but about moral injustice across cultures and industries. Discussions on social media have evolved from anger into darker speculation. Some fans have begun to question whether HYBE's shareholding structure and profit distribution allow for practices that systematically disadvantage artists. Others connect this case to long-standing patterns in the K-pop industry, where artists are often treated as money-making machines without full transparency regarding how the fruits of their labor are used. There are also suspicions that Bang Si-hyuk's silence is not merely a communication strategy, but an indication that an honest clarification would open the door to larger and more dangerous questions for the company's image. Academically, this issue exposes a classic conflict between shareholder interests and artist interests. HYBE, as a public company, has an obligation to increase corporate value and deliver returns to investors. The acquisition of Ithaca Holdings can be viewed as a strategic move to secure a position in the American market. However, when such a move is financed by cash flow that is heavily dependent on a single artist group, reputational risk becomes extremely high. If the public believes that artists are being exploited for expansion ambitions, the company's brand value itself is at risk of collapsing. Jungkook, despite never issuing any statement regarding this issue, has become the symbolic center of that anger. He is seen as a representation of hard work, sacrifice, and artist loyalty to the company. Jungkook's silence, like HYBE's silence, only widens the space for interpretation. Some fans read that silence as evidence that artists lack the freedom to speak. Others hope that behind the scenes, BTS is preparing legal steps or renegotiations that will change the balance of power between artists and agency. As this rumor continues to develop, concerns about the future also emerge. BTS is scheduled to return as a full group in 2026, a moment that is economically predicted to generate an extraordinary surge in revenue. The question now becomes sharper and more unsettling. If financial practices like those alleged truly occurred, could future massive revenues also potentially be used to cover other business risks unrelated directly to BTS? Or will this controversy instead force HYBE to change the way it manages and communicates the use of artist-generated funds? If the truth ultimately always finds its own way, why in this case does silence feel louder than the accusations? And why does every second without an official clarification seem to add to the emotional burden now carried by the names Jungkook, BTS, and millions of fans around the world? This question becomes the core of the third chapter of a controversy that no longer moves solely within the realm of financial speculation, but has transformed into a crisis of trust with the potential to change the face of South Korea's entertainment industry. The rumor about the use of BTS's revenue to cover Scooter Braun's debt may still remain in the realm of allegation, but its impact is already real. In crisis communication theory, there is one principle that is nearly universal. An information vacuum will always be filled by alternative narratives. In HYBE's case, that vacuum has been filled by ARMY's anger, by amateur analyses circulating widely, and by collective memories of various past scandals in the K-pop industry that ultimately proved harmful to artists. Each day without an official statement makes the rumor appear increasingly plausible in the public's eyes, even though concrete evidence has not yet been openly presented. This is where Jungkook's position becomes extremely sensitive. He is not an executive, not a decision-maker, yet his name is drawn in because he is a symbol of BTS's economic and emotional value. In many online discussions, Jungkook is portrayed as the face of the money in question, not because of any fault of his own, but because of his global influence. This creates a painful paradox. The greater his contribution to HYBE's success, the greater the public assumption that he is the party most harmed if the allegations are true. Structurally, HYBE actually has room to refute this rumor through an independent audit or a transparent explanation of the financing flow behind the acquisition of Ithaca Holdings. However, to date, such steps have not been seen. Some industry analysts believe that the reason behind this silence may be more complex than merely avoiding controversy. Opening up financial details could trigger further questions about artist contracts, profit sharing, and internal mechanisms that have rarely been scrutinized by the public. In other words, a single clarification could open a Pandora's box far more dangerous to the company's stability. For ARMY, this issue feels personal. For years, BTS has built a narrative of honesty, struggle, and an equal relationship with fans. When allegations arise that the fruits of their labor were used without transparency to resolve another party's business burdens, a sense of betrayal becomes difficult to avoid. This emotion is amplified by timing. BTS stands on the verge of returning to a new era after mandatory military service, and public expectations for the group's future are extremely high. This controversy arrives like a dark shadow threatening what should be a moment of celebration. From an industry perspective, this case has the potential to become an important precedent. If public pressure continues to rise and forces HYBE to provide clarification or change its policies, it could trigger similar demands for transparency toward other agencies. Artists may begin to question the extent to which their income is used, and whether they have a moral right to know every major decision financed by their labor. In the long term, this could shift the balance of power that has long heavily favored companies. However, there is also another possibility that is quieter and more troubling. This rumor could simply fade without ever being fully confirmed or denied, leaving behind an invisible but permanent wound of mistrust. In that scenario, HYBE might escape legal consequences, but lose something far more valuable: fans' emotional trust in the family narrative that has long been cultivated. For BTS and Jungkook, that wound could manifest as an additional psychological burden amid the global pressures they already face. In the end, the question of whether Jungkook's and BTS's money was truly used to cover Scooter Braun's debt may only be answered by documents and facts that have not yet been made public. But one thing is already clear without the need for any audit. This controversy has exposed a fundamental vulnerability in the relationship between artists, companies, and fans. It shows how fragile trust becomes in the absence of transparency, and how quickly glory can turn into suspicion. Instead, it has been left hanging with unresolved tension. Will HYBE choose to speak and face the storm, or continue to remain silent while hoping the rumor slowly fades away? Will Jungkook and BTS remain symbols of pride without the shadow of doubt, or instead become catalysts for major change within the industry? These questions remain open, and as long as answers are not given, this controversy will continue to live on, pulsing between facts, rumors, and the emotions of millions who feel they share ownership of the story behind the name BTS.